Okay, so welcome to the final session for Tuesday. This great conference, a lot of great information being shared today. Unbelievable. Congratulations if you're watching this video. You should be very impressed with yourself because you're going to be very much smarter after you watch all of these. Leveraging cloud to build your OTT channel. We've talked a little bit about OTT in this section, and I, of course, am but a vessel. I am Guy Finley. I'm the Executive Director of MESA, the Media and Entertainment Services Alliance. MESA helps build efficiencies in the creation, production, and distribution of entertainment content. We represent service providers, but also have a very deep interaction with not only the content holders and creators, the studios and the networks, but also with other trade associations in the space, such as ETC, a bunch of other acronyms, DEG, EMA, I could go on forever. But the bottom line is, today, here, I've brought these fine gentlemen together to really have an open, interactive discussion that sets up what you really need to do for OTT and how do you leverage cloud around an OTT solution. So think of this as the beginning at the end, because we won't be getting that deep, but we will certainly leverage all these gentlemen's awesome knowledge. I'm going to start with Stephen Chester. Please introduce yourself and talk about your company and your role.
Assuming the mic is live. Hey,
Yes.
It's Stephen Chester. I'm Vice President of Global Media at Akamai Technologies. I work within our carrier division, specifically focused on operators, cable, telco, satellite, and other companies looking to go over the top, usually using their network. Partner a lot with a lot of companies here and in the audience, and that's my role.
Fantastic. Tim? No, it's for mostly for on camera. Yeah. Thank you.
Mine says on too. Hey, Tim Padilla with Optimity Advisors. I run the media and entertainment practice for the firm. We're a global firm. We advise clients on strategy all the way down to getting things done. From an OTT standpoint for us, we advise clients on how to monetize their content, on how to get their organizations in line to support that. There's a lot of change in the world. If you think about a big studio environment, this is a very disruptive practice, so we help them actually formulate a strategy and set up operationally on a day-to-day basis.
Doug Reinhardt, I'm Chief I must have.
Try that one and just repeat that whole thing.
Yeah, I must have worn it out with all the questions.
So, Doug?
I wore that one out, I'm sure. Okay, so again, my name is Doug Reinhardt. I'm Chief Operating Officer of Content Bridge Systems. We are a digital distribution platform. We primarily work with content owners and independent rights holders, from large studios to the smaller content owners, and we help them distribute their content primarily to over-the-top providers like iTunes, Netflix, and all of the I suppose very familiar services that people are purchasing content from today or renting content from.
Okay, so we set this up a little bit into buckets. So let's talk a little bit about the 4 pillars of OTT. One end, preparation, and distribution, right? I told you we were going to be. So I've placed these mugs up here so that we all know which bucket we are responsible for. But I will also open this up to you guys. Do not be afraid to raise your hand, ask questions. That's one of the things that we love to do is make our panels all interactive. So don't be shy. We have to wait until the end. Okay. Do you want to, Stephen, give us an overview of these 4 pillars? Or do you
It is self-explanatory. We'll make it a group kind of discussion. I mean, clearly, you have to have a plan.
Yeah.
I think our thing is about going over the top, so it's about cloud-based, right?
Sure.
So I think today, there's a lot of people that are going over the top and are probably acquiring hardware and software to do it. I think that today it's a scale game. It's about getting, it's speed to market. It's about having all the SLAs that everybody today expects. I don't think if you have those in place, the bar today is so high, you're probably going to miss the window. So I think it's about, leveraging SaaS-based systems. Clearly, there's companies in these verticals that play in that field. But first and foremost, you got to start with content strategy, right? So
Fantastic.
Are you licensing content? Are you creating your own original content? Are you doing on-demand content, live content? What business windows? All of those things have to be decided. And then with those come a whole bunch of requirements, usually from the content providers, which set up the rest of the stacks.
Fantastic. Tim, you want to start?
I'll echo some of that. From us, a content strategy is how you're going to approach the market with your content. And we tend to work with larger studios, broadcasters that are possibly moving from a traditional model to an over-the-top model. So how does that integrate? We will also get back into the organization to get the different business units that are used to doing things in their own way, in their own windows. Obviously, that's been changing over the years. But the disruption that OTT brings means organizationally you need a different approach to understand your content and look at the top line rather than your individual line. So that's one of the innovative pieces of an organizational structure that we bring to bear. A little bit outside, but it's something that you need to think about on an organizational level. And also on scalability, it's the cloud gives you the ability to scale, essentially infinitely, right? It also gives you the availability. In the good old days, we had to make sure that we had the content close to us because it had to be hooked right up to the transcoder. In today's world, you're outputting the simple days, the salad days. In today's world, you're doing something entirely different. We were prepping for this call, and I mentioned something like 25 formats, and one of you guys chimed in with, well, it's more like 60. So things continue to accelerate. Having that content in one place rather than having to get it to another place and then creating those formats gives you that scale and that availability. That acquiring
Well,
all
you have
that.
like MPEG
equipment.
Dash is coming, right? HVUC is coming. There's a constant change requires a lot of resources. So I think that leveraging the cloud is something that can benefit a lot of people who are looking to go over the top.
Would you see? I'm sorry. Would you see cloud ease? Like the 4K codec going on in the background. Is that going to make life easier for us, or is it going to make life more complicated? I mean, in the old days, it was a heck of a lot more complicated.
These workflows usually have to be standardized. The standardization simplifies everything. I also think there's a cost benefit to it. When you look at over-the-top solutions today, people who are running these businesses, the margins can be razor thin at times. So you quickly can get yourself in a little bit of trouble if you're not figuring out how to do it properly.
I think that, to your point, the more that these activities are moving to the cloud, the more that they're part of distributed IT processes, and the more the compute power and the storage resources become enormous and available, the less of an impact these changes on formats or other things may have in the future. In the past, it took us how long to adopt HD within the broadcast infrastructure because so much was impacted, hardwired infrastructure that was impacted. We've seen presentations today that essentially represented sort of virtual broadcast operations, data center based, virtualized. And in that case, I think that from a content owner's perspective, I think they're going to be slightly more insulated from some of the effects of these changes. But maybe for consumers, going out and buying a TV and now all of a sudden 4K and now you've got HDR or other things might maybe still be an issue. But I think that the fact that we're going to the cloud might actually help in that regard a little bit.
Yeah, I think your point of the processing power that's available not only not only processing power that's available not only in the cloud locally, but even in the TV, it changes a lot of things. We did a lot of work on J2K years ago, and there's people in the room that actually helped us with that, and then we moved that into the IMF. And you look at those things today, and how much work went into it. I think that gets a lot easier in today's world. I think that changes dramatically, and that focus on quality, it's still very important, but you are able to enhance that in the chain and ensure it in the chain.
Let's also, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to steal your mic while we get through here. Let's talk a little bit, I can talk loud. The bottom line is let's talk about a little bit about creation versus curation, right? The idea of, is this going to be a fragmentation when you look at the curation side? Are we going to go to, 50 different OTT channels because we like one particular flavor better, but essentially we're curating all the same catalog? Or how do you see the evolution of, we obviously know what HBO is doing and Netflix and people like Awesomeness TV and the MCNs, you know, the idea around the pros and cons, if somebody is stepping into this, maybe has a brand that's very recognizable, would you recommend Curation, or is that something that's just so its own beast that you wouldn't even bring it up? Just a little weighing back and forth between the two. Tim?
I think I'll look at it from a consumer standpoint. I mean, I want to go to my Apple TV or my smart TV, and I kind of want to go to one place, and that's how I think about this. So if I'm going to advise a brand, you need to think about what it is that you get out of creating your own channel. You look at the data that you get from a consumer who buys something and then plays it, pauses it, maybe finishes it, doesn't finish it. What are those habits? That data is sometimes more valuable than the sale because it's a predictor of future sales and a way to actually get back into their home. So I think you have to think of those things, what you get using someone else versus rolling your own.
To add to that, I mean, I think we're thinking America. You also you think international, and now you're thinking about supporting an over-the-top solution globally. I think that all of a sudden, operators or people that can aggregate all those together, it's going to be a better experience for the user versus, I mean, I don't want that many apps on my phone. Why am I going to want that many apps on whatever box I'm using on the television? I don't think it makes sense.
Yeah, I think it comes down to the amount of your ability to market and drive viewers to your app or your icon or whatever on an Apple TV or whatever it is. That's problematic for some people with marginal content. You have the advantages of having the direct access to the consumer, but it's really whether you can drive the eyeballs and the demand. The one thing that we don't know today, in the future, what in the way of intelligent search and discovery engines that can sit over top of, now maybe you could have 150 or 200 or 500 or 1,000 apps of branded content, but you are able to search and discover and find everything that you need at any point. That doesn't exist today. Could it at some point? Possibly. You think it does? Oh, yeah. Well, there you go. Oh,
Yeah. Sure, of course. You want to wait for the microphone? It's just illegal. Yeah. Yeah, by the way, yeah.
About the now it's just fan.
Just fan, yeah.
On a personal level, when I look for content now, rather than search through the DirecTV listing and the this listing and iTunes and Netflix, etc., Fanstar is this wonderful aggregator or fan now. It's not deep enough, but it'll show based on what's installed on the device whether I can see it on HBO Go or Netflix or Amazon Prime, or because I've put in my local TV thing if it happens to be on TV wise. But it's what's missing from everything. And then I throw this back to the panel of what do they think in the context of micro subscriptions for content types, whether by genre or by content creator. I'll take my
because
answer
essentially
off
also
air.
You want us to answer that?
your basic. Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
I mean, it makes sense. I mean, we can look at the Paula Deen launch that just recently happened. We can argue whether the marketing was done right, whether she was the right personality to do it. I don't know how that's doing today. It's very quiet at the moment.
Well, WWE is another example too, right?
Right. So I don't. Maybe it's too. Is it too early, or is it just that the forecasted market for it isn't there yet? I don't know. It's a good question.
But doesn't
And we all think that's coming, right?
But
we all
doesn't
think
this-
we're going to pay for it. That's the other problem. That's where all of a sudden when you start looking at this and you start rolling this whole model, what it costs to buy each of these pieces, and then you roll in what you're going to need to do from a sub basis and the cost of creating the original. I mean, she had original content and then her library right from the Food Network. Yeah, that all up, you need to hit a run rate very quickly. So it can be a challenge.
I circling back to the curation versus content creation, right?
Right.
We know HBO Go, we know Netflix from a brand perspective. They're content creators. Does the curation group, that's just repurposing many different streams of content? Does that become the morass? Does that become the 1,000 meaningless channels on television?
No, it's a good question, right?
And does it just fade into the background noise that, late at night when you can't sleep, that's what you're surfing? Is it, HBO Go? It's like I signed up to HBO to get HBO Go, because it's great and they had The Sopranos and shows that I actually
got
want to
depth.
watch. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm not
Years of
I'm not
creating
the target market for this as much anymore. young as I look. But I think that's the question is what are people going to consume? How are they going to consume it? How do you connect with them in this ever-changing world? So that it's.
But I mean, when you talk about this platform that you need to launch and you need to build, you need to cover not just iOS, Android, PC, and Mac. There's all these other game consoles, TVs. So you got all these applications you have to build and support them on a monthly basis.
Mm-hmm.
You have a platform, a CMS, all. So when you start going through the stack, you start adding up a pretty big operation that you're going to run. So I think the content strategy has to relate to obviously the cost of running this business.
Sure.
And today, I mean, it's a little bit of a, it's like, the tail before the dog or the hat or the horse or the cat, whatever you want to call it.
And Invivio did a great presentation. I don't know if he's still in here, but awesome on numbers. On cost of traditional versus versus cloud-based. It's fascinating. So absolutely, this actually goes right into the front end piece, and I'm not going to talk about it. I put myself up there because the front end portion of this also is another critical piece, right? I mean, that's why we distilled it down to these 4 points, right? What are the most critical pieces that a lay person walking into it can be like, okay, I understand. So let's talk a little bit about that front end piece, and because Chromecast, Roku, Apple TV, Fire TV, right? These are pieces of an on-demand play, right? A video on-demand play. But what about also electronic sell-through? There was another great presentation on electronic sell-through today, and its importance in the evolution of this ecosystem. Can we talk a little bit about front end and what that is? Because ultimately, that's the user experience, right?
Yeah, I mean, we had a call yesterday to organize around that, and I think we defined front end as the applications, the CMS, the storefront, the billing, all those things you need to basically run what the customer sees and how to run your operation on the backside. Clearly today you can go out and you can buy the gear yourself and you can do it yourself. There's also options out there that are cloud-based.
Right. White label.
Again, it's that question of whether you want to be encumbered with running an operation and having people run around building apps and updating apps every day, or whether there's people that can do it better today and they're bolted on to this ecosystem and you get the scale, you get that wind in your sails.
I think that was what was particularly apparent in a lot of the presentations today is the rapid evolution of the capabilities that will really sway the equation, I think, for most content owners toward a buy versus make. And I think that to try to make and replicate capabilities that some of the presenters showed today, at this point in time, again, they're in the content business. They're not in the digital infrastructure business necessarily. And so I think that the good news for the content owners is that they have many options now, some turnkey, some componentized, and that will, I think, make things a lot easier, and it will increase the volume of these solutions that we start to see.
You need to look at your brand too, and what it's going to bear in the marketplace, and figure what the value is. Because some brands are going to be valuable to people as a standalone, some aren't. So I think that's something you can't dismiss.
And one of the gotchas in all this is, the scale is the first piece, because if you're also talking about studio content, you need a very unbreakable CMS. I think that's important. You can find that as your system's making all these calls, it can start breaking down. The other part to this is customization. It can be a rabbit hole that's hard to get out of. So people start with a white label. They want it, hey, this is what I can afford, and then it quickly unravels into, I want the player to do this. I want these features, and you start looking at seven-figure, integration, or let's call it, evolvement of your platform, and those all of a sudden add up very quickly, and it's a hole that a lot of people end up in.
Interesting. The other thing that I think when you talk about leveraging cloud as well is the idea that these systems all integrate and tie in, right? And whether you cobble it together, you take a white label solution that's proven. Ultimately, we haven't even approached the big data aspect of what. And ultimately, it's kind of your front end that dictates, all right, where, what they buy, what they spend, where they go. How can I leverage what they're doing to sell to them more effectively? I mean, do we want to get into a little bit of that from the cloud side, and how all these pieces supposedly are interacting and engaging with each other to form this front end backbone?
They all interact, right?
Of course.
I think that, clearly your front end is, I mean, we've said it's defining your user. It's defining who that customer is, what to expect, how they're going to search, how they're going to discover. You need all these feature sets that go with it, right? And all that kind of affects the rest of the stack. So from a metadata standpoint as well, I mean, you're going to collect a lot up front. You're also going to collect stuff through this stack that we're calling. And
Well,
go ahead.
I think some of the data availability, whether it's big or not so big, is going to depend on whether you're going direct through your own solution or you're going through a third party. And I think sometimes we also make the mistake of assuming that the future is going to be one or the other for particular content companies. It's like any consumer good where you have a channel strategy where you're selling into, quote, distribution channels, and then maybe you have your own distribution, wholly owned distribution. It could be that companies are going to find a mix where they actually can reach out to a certain clientele, but then also find themselves on some popular over-the-top channels. In those cases, they'll have less data in terms of what customers are accessing it, unless they can find a way to tunnel in through Facebook and other social media to determine who's watching and how did they find it. But then with their own channel, they'll be able to access much more data directly if that's the route they're taking.
And bringing this together from a business standpoint, we've been doing a lot of work helping the larger entertainment companies look at their master data, their title information, product data, to be able to tie those things together, because they've got it, they've got it being created 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different places. So without that ability to actually analyze what's going on, you're missing the trends, you're missing the opportunities, and you're not making the right choices going forward. So that's a big kind of underpinning piece.
Well, I think also as this business matures, right? I mean, because we're still in the early days, even though there's some old men in this business, right? But ultimately, it's you
Speak for yourself.
No, I always laugh. Joe Inzarilla, MLB, I call him the old man in the business, right? Because he's been doing it for 10 years, right? Very successfully. But ultimately, this is an area where, as we get some of the initial hiccups done and the confidence grows in terms of quality of service and all that side of it, I think that's when you start saying, okay, let's start really digging deeper on this. Because I know a lot of people that come up to me and, oh yeah, we've got big data, and they're it's like a wave sitting in the background. They hand you a thimble, and it's like, look at my big data. It's awesome. So
On the other hand, I'm seeing a lot of big data that they don't have the ability to actually make meaning out of it.
True that.
There are companies in this space just amassing huge terabytes, petabytes worth of data.
No idea what
about
to do with
transactions, and they have no way to mine it and understand.
dark data.
You
Yeah,
have to light it.
Is that what we're calling it now?
that's good. That's a good one. That's a really good one. Should we talk a little bit about preparation and move into this? And by the way, any other questions from the audience on the front end piece of it? Any gray areas? I mean, a lot of you guys are providers, so I don't expect a lot of questions. No?
I can talk a little bit about the preparation or maybe the back end side of it. And I guess, if I compare where we're at in distribution to some of the earlier discussions, maybe mostly yesterday, on where the cloud is working for content preparation and production, I think the irony here is that there's always been this silo and this gap from the time that in the case of feature film, things are created and produced, and now we're in an environment where we can be in a distributed, cloud-based production, and all the great benefits that we've been talking about are there. On the preparation side, on the distribution end, that's still a long way off. And so what we at Content Bridge are sort of predicated on the notion that you begin from a master element that is clean and good and conformed, and metadata that's clean and good and conformed. And when you have that, you can then apply automation to create whatever formats of deliverables that you need, whether it's for a particular retailer or for your own over-the-top channel. The problem with it is that almost no content companies are really in a good position today with their libraries to be what we would call really distribution ready and distribution agile with their distribution elements. They're missing languages. The assets aren't conformed. In many cases, the assets they have were from broadcast sources, which are not what is required for digital distribution, because they've got all sorts of crazy, frame rate and cadence issues that have to be corrected. And it's going to be an issue for a while, because there are yet know really effective automated ways to basically throw something in the quote mangler and have it come out the other end and be now a nicely frame accurate, conformed, progressive product that can be distributed. So that's something that we see with the largest studios, and then even with the very small content owners, it's going to be an issue for a while.
I can speak to the effort that it takes to build that library in that way. And we found out early on, the more reliable you make the content, the more reliable everything is downstream. Like an encoder is quite reliable if you feed it consistent content, right? But that was a big effort, like Herculean effort, and it's still in place today. But I don't know. Are there people out here that can tell us about things that are making that easier, even de-interlacing so that it shows up good on a computer screen or an iPad, for example?
Steven.
Well, I'll put on my Akamai hat.
Yeah, please do.
So from a CDN standpoint, I mean, the one thing is, I mean, in the days of DVD, right, you created a packaged good. I sold you that packaged good. I controlled that experience because it was my disc, basically, that's being wholesaled out. You know, you put it on the internet, you put it on a CDN or over a network, things change. Things are in flux. We CDNs and networks clearly we're working as hard as we can to guarantee that TV-like experience. But you know, when someone's on a phone in a car going 60 miles an hour, everything changes. So it's interesting because in one sense we have that hat from when we used to create things and they were kind of static, and now we're dealing with cloud, and cloud changes everything. So there's that quality issue. The second issue is from a content prep standpoint. Second issue is, you know, if everybody in here is a customer of Akamai's and you're all distributors, I probably have the same assets. If we're talking about a TVOD library, I have the same assets over and over and over again in the library. And if also I'm a CFO on a distributor side, you know, the challenge today is if I want to grow my library for my consumers, I have an ever-growing storage problem. It doesn't go away. I think one of the challenges for the industry is how do we solve the storage problem? I think if we can get the storage curve to kind of flatten out while the revenues go up on the sub side, or as people are buying the content, we can change the model and drive a little bit more margin in the business. But today, we have a storage problem because we continue to store the same assets over and over and over again. So I think there's some intelligence that we need in the network, and that's only going to come from kind of participation of all the parties.
The other thing I was going to bring up is the one-button transcode or rainbow mythical no-button transcode. I mean, this is where we actually leverage the drops of the cloud, as was stated so eloquently in the previous session, right? And start leveraging an asset more than just, all right, it's coming in, coming out on my system.
Right.
I mean, do you see a world? I mean, look, we're all service providers. We're all competing, right, for the same business, right? But we have partnerships and we form a strategic plan.
Right.
Do you see an idea, a day or an ideal?
IMF.
Where this-
I mean, if IMF was prevalent across all the content providers, I mean, conceptually, you would have a folder with all the assets in it, and all the companies can participate in how to service that and find economies of scale in that.
Yeah, and I think that's
Today, it's not fully baked yet, right? We're there and we're not there. So.
Yeah, I think even if the actual video format within that IMF package evolves over time, just the fact that you have a construct that's relatively consistent, or that I think what really is the world to be looking for is that a content owner basically publishes their distribution package, whatever that is, and it may be slightly different from one studio to the other, but that's sort of immaterial in today's processing world. That can be figured out. But that there is a common sort of package type, and it's the one that they published with all the rights wrapped around it and managed. And then it is kind of getting, Jason, to your world where now you're talking about publishing rights and pointers to a particular asset, and then the transforming easily done in the cloud at that point. So I think that if we could get to that part, and maybe with the production in the cloud, that becomes a consistent set of deliverables that just naturally rolls off of production, and there it is. I think that's definitely something it's not rocket science. It can be done.
We first started talking about this years ago. There was the concept of the everything to everything box, and that was built into hardware. And you asked a question of like, okay, when an encoder changes, what's your timeline for getting that into your box? And it was not a great answer because it was a very long time. So today we're talking about doing it in software, but you need to understand what that thing is that's coming in, and that's the idea of IMF, is that wrapper. It's the HDCAM SR equivalent, right? So if you can understand what it is and you can actually decode it, you're good to go. That's the challenge that we have, and what the heavy lifting goes into, and the different results that come out of it.
Absolutely. Here, let me get you a microphone.
Yeah.
Give you a compliment and put you on the spot.
Uh-oh. That's like a kiss and a slap. I'm a little worried right now.
So world now we are. So the good news
Yeah.
on the storage issue.
Right.
What are your greatest challenge? And you guys have been awesome trying to, because we have so many stations that we have to storage of
Sure,
12, 15
exactly.
years. And you have been, I know we're your largest in storage. I wish we were the largest in streaming events like soccer.
Right.
But at least you've been great in that.
Yeah.
Here's my question, and for really the panel, anybody in the room, the greatest challenge, since we are so dedicated to Akamai, is the ability for dynamic ad insertion on all these devices. So in the
Right.
OTT world, my challenge is this.
Right.
We're going to be using AMP.
Right.
We're a faithful fan, but
Right.
what people really want is a dynamic ad insertion on all these devices. So here's the challenge. When Adobe does such an amazing job for the Super Bowl and the Olympics,
Right.
and they set a standard, where do people like us go? We're not making a deal with Major League Baseball. There's Adobe that does events like Super Bowl and the Olympics. Where does the everyday company go that has to solve the equations of simultaneous screens and dynamic ads to show up at the right time in the right place on client server side? Go ahead, sir.
So it's kind of like I can answer it in a couple different ways, because I think the right way to do it is, at the end of the day, the content provider in those licensing agreements is locking down. It kind of goes back to historically the way we did it, is locking down how those things are going to be configured. You know, how do I distribute my assets? How do I publish them out? Today, it works in a variety of ways. I mean, we have companies that come to us and say, well, we want the flavor of this to be this. And what we've started at Akamai, what we started to do is started to align with, and there are folks in this room, and I've seen someone in particular who's worked also at a CDN. And, you know, at the end of the day, we know how to deliver to those devices. We know pretty well how to also maintain quality of service and all those things. And we have tools that we can give you, the customer. So I'm going to switch to it. So that was the first thing. But to dynamic ad insertion, here's the curveball to it. The question is, should the client be managing that, or should the server be managing that? Right? And that's something that we're constantly today kind of looking at and figuring it out. I mean, I think that, you know, today the client does it. The question is it better to do it in the network at the server, because we can do a lot of stuff, you know, quickly and scale? Those are things that still the industry needs to land on. And we have our opinions, but
I'd also say that that's another reason why initiatives like ITER and initiatives like Ad ID are so critical, because it levels the playing field. It democratizes that whole process, because it no longer becomes a relationship or a deal. It just becomes ones and zeros, and it's like, okay, I know what's going on with this piece. This is the ad that matches all that. I mean, that really ultimately is it, right? So go ahead. Sorry, Brendan.
Brendan knows a little bit about this subject matter.
Yeah, I might add that, you know, one of the really
it high
frustrating things is that technology-wise, it works very different from the linear national ad world with Scuddy tags to the digital, highly dynamic, IP-based world. The good news is those are really starting to converge. And so when that happens, I mean, lots of players can now put dynamic ads in using a VAST tag as the way to pick, decision the right ad. So that's good. We're getting more standard. But I think once the conversion of a Scuddy tag for like live broadcasted content and better rights of exactly which part of the ad pod you can replace at what moment in time, and you can convert that automatically into a VAST tag, then you're going to see some good innovative solutions that bring the whole thing together. And we're starting in 2015 to finally see, I mean, we've been talking about it for about 10 years, but we're starting to see some interesting things hit the market in 2015. So I think it'll be a big year for the convergence of DAI in some forms of this media.
And we partnered with Ubiquity, for example, to kind of figure out if we can answer some of these questions, because they deal with so much of the content and dealing with the advertising with the operators, and we dealing so much with the delivery aspect of it. This is one of the ways we're trying to, come up with an answer.
It's also part of the evolution of that ad model, in a sense that when you look at what Turner's going to do for the upfront this year, and it comes down to also the analytics within your organization and knowing what your customers are doing, because we're no longer going to be relying on these big aggregators, Neil. Right? It's going to be about your actual metrics of what your actual user experience to be able to dynamically insert it in the right piece. Sorry. Good question up top.
It's not a question. It's an answer, actually, to the dynamic ad question, because gentleman probably missed my presentation earlier. I'm Arno with NVIDIA. So we've actually worked out a solution, a cloud-based solution that works server-side in the network, that's completely independent from the various formats and devices out there. Works something similar like Adobe does, but it'll work on any format, right? So come see me.
Presentation too.
So there is something for that, and come see me at Overdrinks. So.
Absolutely. All right. On the preparation side, any other pieces from a cloud perspective? I mean, we've seen some interesting presentations today that basically are, again, are leveraging federated spaces that people can log in, log out of, rather than actually physically moving bits from location to location.
The only thing I would add at the end on preparation is that there's this other trend. I guess it's in relation to IMF, but it's component-based deliveries, and the notion that company can literally, basically they're acting on the service providers, the third-party service providers' systems, programming directly, and so they're inserting or replacing language elements, inserting and replacing closed captions and text files, even after deliveries. And so there's less the sense now of a package delivery. And I think that that's something else that some of the larger third-party, over-the-top providers are looking to their major content companies to enable. The problem is that even the big ones aren't really all that equipped to manage. It's sort of, I used the analogy before, if you're Taco Bell, you're selling burritos, ground beef, and shredded lettuce and cheese as a separate SKU. It's just not part of your end SKUs, and so it's going to be another thing that the content companies are going to have to be ready to address.
Sorry.
Let's stick to pizza as a service as an analogy, by the way. All right, can't go to tacos this late in the day. All right, pepperoni, sausage, cheese, dough. Go ahead, Tim.
I was just going to pick up on that because that's a sea change in the delivery of television content from the way that it's done today, and to truly enable that model and be able to understand what elements you're gonna push out when, and to give the consumer the choices that they really want to lock them into a service, lock them into a show, get their eyeballs, be able to actually do dynamic ad insertion that makes sense for them so they don't click off the content. Those are things on the content prep. It goes before content preparation. It's the post-production side that is gonna benefit from this.
And that's all going to move fast and furious. I mean,
is
to
moving.
the point where, at the beginning of the Oscars, you're going to have a rate, and at the end of the Oscars, you're going to have a rate. That's going to change from the moment that it started to the moment that it finished.
I would argue this is one of the challenges. And if we solve this problem, every cable operator or OTT partner, whoever in the world, should be able to access the equipment, the files, assuming all the systems are in place. They should be able to pull it down. It should be a URL. It's a 1 second deal.
Absolutely.
Not the current process right now that we're challenged with.
All right, we got a couple minutes left. Let's talk about this final piece. Stephen, this is your piece, the distribution side of it.
It's pretty simple. At this point, it's for Akamai, clearly we're focused on quality of service, we're focused on scale, focused on security. Today, we have we call it the 2 second rule. Basically, if there's buffering or if you're having a challenge getting to the content or it's not performing well, we know those eyeballs leave quickly. And I think where we see today, is my microphone not working? Switching over. I think, from how we see it today, we know, you look at the events we're doing, you talk about Super Bowl, you talk about, all the other big events, Olympics, World Cup. The scale that we're dealing with today and the complexity that we're dealing with today forces us continually to focus on a couple things. It's security, making sure your content's secure and your content's protected, making sure too that we have the highest quality experience. So it's all those feature sets you guys want as well, DVR functionality, everything else. And lastly, it comes down to the scale. We got to make sure that it works everywhere where you want it to work. And we've baked it down to pretty simple stuff. It's clearly more complicated in the background. But I mean, that's where we're making our investments, and we continue to make our investments. And we don't see this trend going away. I mean, you add in 4K and you add in all the format changes, this is only getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So
I think from a consumer standpoint, it's people are starting to get tolerance for the things going up and down a little bit, adaptive streaming, and they get an understanding of it. It still takes you out of the experience a little bit, but we're actually getting accustomed to it. I think that's a positive thing that is going to only make the experience better and make people more accepting.
yeah, I mean, we're a lot of the other things that are coming into play, which will affect everybody in this room, is for example, how do we pre-cache content? I mean, you're having a launch date. Let's say you're an OTT, solution today. You're out in the market. You have a big title. It might make your year. How do you make sure that's cached somewhere locally or actually on that device or in that network? So on the day of release, you make sure that every consumer that wants to buy it, can access it, can watch and have a great experience. So these are a lot of the other peer-to-peer stuff and all that kind of stuff that we talk about that's going on right now as well.
Well, and the big wrench in that is 4K, right? Because even though we've got some innovators, outliers who are working on their codecs and promising great things, and YouTube being one of them, in all fairness, right?
Right. Yeah.
But the issue and idea is when you start talking about mass, right? And it goes back to the old days of when DVD was being quote unquote threatened by digital,
right?
And it's like, what Warren Lieberfart, what if everybody tried to download Shrek 2 at the same time? Every toilet would explode in New York. Right? Sorry, I'm paraphrasing.
Did Warren
obviously.
say that? Warren would say
that.
that.
Yeah, he said he likened it to plumbing and said if everybody flushed their toilet in New York, the whole city would blow up in a giant water bomb, which he's probably right. God bless him. But I think 4K is the real wrinkle here that we have we have ideas, but we have no idea yet.
It also goes back to what Tim just said. I mean, if the consumer's mind, in their mind, they've raised the bar and they're expecting this experience, they're going to go to wherever they can get that experience. So the quality really matters, how that plays back. I don't know if 4K as one-off events that we're seeing today or watching 4K, a little bit of 4K content is a challenge. It's when you think about libraries of it. Libraries and libraries and libraries and channels and channels and channels of it. That's where all of a sudden we have a pipe problem. So
I'm interested to see the uptake, because when HD came out, we were in a very different world, and we had time to kind of catch up. And with 4K, either it's going to explode or it's going to go slow, and we'll catch up or not.
Yeah, I mean, the HD thing was a giant coordinated effort.
I mean, the only thing I would add is that while all of these are going to be great for consumer experiences, what is happening, at least in some cases with the third-party OTT providers, the aggregated digital retailers, is that their inventory and what they're curating is really winnowing the pipe. So there's a lot of, and okay, we can make the argument that maybe some of this content wasn't all that compelling in any event, but I'm always under the assumption that as digital evolved, it would just lead to many more choices. Basically, everything that was ever made could be at your fingertips. I know that was promised during a Quest ad at one point.
I love that ad.
1990. It was 1999.
Every movie that's ever been made.
Yeah. So that's not happening because of technical issues necessarily. It's because a lot of the curation functions within these retailers and that have really clamped down on some of the more the smaller and independent content owners too. And then add 4K to that, and the fact that those. Okay, we'll try it like this, and then we'll see. But so in any event, I think that's something that we have to watch too. Is that sometimes we lose sight on the technical side of what the purpose of all this is, and that is to make sure that consumers on any device have access to the broadest content that they can get. So,
but avails in the business case are also critical to that important piece of it. All right, question from Robert.
Well, actually, it's not a question. Also, I'd like to see some effort. Whoever's watching this on the manufacturer end. I mean, these devices are not really smart devices. So I would like to see more on the Samsung side, on the Chromecast side, on the Amazon Fire side, making their computers more powerful inside of their devices. They are really dumb devices, which don't offer any type of interactivity, don't offer any type of like pre-caching or anything like that, where you could, have these things be a lot more intelligent. So I'd also like to see the manufacturers kind of pick it up and put some more processing power behind, their engines to make these applications run better.
Question up there.
Actually, work for Tim out of Timony. Just two things to add. Isn't there opportunities there for service providers to have partnerships with some of these to help facilitate the flow of data? And on the other side of pre-caching, I know, for example, PlayStation is making the PlayStation View, which is going to be kind of their OTT service. And since they manufacture the system and also going to have original content, couldn't they possibly do pre-caching and have kind of their own way of doing it, where aggregators kind of like Chromecast and that use Netflix, et cetera, couldn't do it?
You want me to answer the? I'll answer the pre. I mean, look, if you control your own network, you can cache anything you want, right? Yeah, and a device that stores, right? Right. The question is how to do it at scale and how to do it for an industry, right? So that whoever the customers are, the distributors are in our marketplace, can have access to it and can start planning their businesses. Today, people are figuring it out how to do it, but they're one-offs, right? Or they're large corporations who have the wherewithal to do it and partner with companies like all of us to figure it out.
I would also say on the collaboration side, right? Each of these stacks has multiple. Each of these pieces of this stack, quote unquote, have multiple vendors, right? And you can also go in. We saw some slides from other presenters where they have already created their partner network. So it's not as if you're just dealing with one company and you're beholden to their philosophy, their principles, their timeline, their structure. They offload it off to numerous partners in that thing too. I think that from a collaborative aspect, right, this industry has made leaps and bounds in the last decade in terms of like, all right, who are, forget about the movie making side and getting the movie done, right? We've collaborated forever, right? Everybody begs, borrows, and steals and gets it done, right? Creative vision and makes it happen, right? That's Hollywood, right? But when you start talking about retail, you start talking about all these different service providers that are making this experience happen, cloud, internet, otherwise. I don't think we've ever been this, tightly woven as an industry, even though we're competing.
I think
we're all very
historically people were in their own little,
camps.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we didn't share information. You have to. In this world, we all have to share information because we all have to work with each other. Huh?
Yeah, that's it. The best strategic alliance.
Exactly.
Correct.
Right.
Correct. That's a whole.
Sorry, say it again.
Yeah.
What's the question?
He meant more like cable service provider.
Pre-caching?
No, in terms of collaboration, I think. Or were you talking pre-cache? Or are you talking about collaboration? Collaboration, right?
Yeah, so my focus today is on the carrier side. I used to be on the media side, and if you're talking specifically about over the top, the carriers are challenged by it. I mean, the large carriers, the top 5%, they have the wherewithal to do it. The question is, is consolidation and buying other companies going to get you to the point where you can compete with a Hulu, an iTunes, an Amazon, a YouTube, for example? And you can argue, and I'm going to pull it back to cloud, is today a lot of them would rather focus on their network at times because that's from they like to build rack and stack gear, and so I think they're at this inflection point because in a sense the question is how can I use today my network and move to a hybrid model leveraging the cloud and the network. So for example, do I store, if I have 100,000 assets that make up SVOD, TVOD, catch-up TV, and all this stuff, how much of it should stay on the network? How much maybe I should put up in the cloud? And I think that if they have the controls, can start playing around with that to say, it's the 80-20 rule. I have 600 titles that are making the majority of my money. I'm going to have those on my network distributed all the way out to the homes, right? And for everything else, I'm going to keep it up in a network where maybe I'm sharing on a multi-tenancy kind of model where everybody, I'm taking down the costs. Now, all of a sudden, I've gotten smart about how I'm pushing content around. So the intelligence of the networks becomes critical because I can shape that traffic and decide where I want to put things. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
For someone that's small,
Yeah. Right. With the
It's easy. And also, you brought up Showtime, right? CBS, right? And the other thing is you got Comcast, NBC Uni, you've got Time Warner. The other key will be, all right, what is the next big merger and the next big conglomeration across?
Operators have challenges right now. I mean, they've got market dynamics that are just crazy. There's so much going on. So.
Yep, and they're struggling to keep subscribers. All right, we've run out of time, but thank you so much. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you to the participants. Thank you to ETC, NAB for a great day. Eric, you want to say a few words?
Okay.